Well, I want to talk about this morning and do some teaching on fear, might, and hope. Is anyone in here, have you ever had a fear? Or do you have a fear? What is fear? Fear is conditional, really. Really is. This might happen. That might happen. They may happen. We live in a world, it's often a scary place to live in, huh? Have you watched any news? Have you watched any killings, burglars? It's sad. We live in a scary world. Paul tells Timothy something. I'm going to paraphrase it. He says, Timothy, your fear is not from God. What do come from God are power, love, and a stable mental attitude. It's in 2 Timothy 1:7, paraphrased. Now fear, think about it. Fear most time is based on the future. Now, and I know that, we know some things that makes us fearful in the future, but most usually fear is in the future. We're afraid of what we don't know about the future. Gallup poll had a poll from the teenagers. Ask them what did they fear most in life. Number one, they feared terrorist attacks. Can you guess what number two was? Spiders. Spiders. Then they said death or being killed, not succeeding in life or being a failure, war, heights, crime and violence, being alone, and nuclear war. Have you noticed something about that? Every one of these were maybes. They were future. Maybe I might see a spider. Maybe there might be a terrorist attack. That's in the future they're talking about. Who's the answer to all of our fears? God. God Almighty. Hey, if God is good and loving, and He is, and if God is all-powerful, and He is, and if God has a purpose and a plan that includes everyone in here, and He does, and if we're His children, and I pray that we all are, there's no reason to fear. But there's every reason to hope. God is in control of everything. Now, ain't that good theology? Ain't that good theology? That's good Bible reading, But do you still have fears? I do. Be honest with yourself. Eddie told me one time, he said, Daddy, I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm afraid of them. It's true, people. It's one thing to know something up here. It's another thing to know it way down here. You take little children. You put your little daughter to bed at night. Just in a few minutes, you go out, living room, and you sit down. Oh, Mommy, Daddy. You run back in there. What's wrong, honey? I'm scared of the dark. Bobo might be over there. First thing you do, you turn the light on. You have to look all the way around. You want that mind to see there's nothing there. But then, you got to get that heart in tune with that mind. It's one thing knowing up here. It's another thing knowing down here. We've got to get our heart and our mind in tune. God is in control. Give fears to God. You know what? I have to learn to do that. I have to learn. I have to drive out my fears by increasing my knowledge of God. Proverbs 3:25 says, "Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor of trouble from the wicked when it comes." Does anybody know the story about Andrea Gale, the boat? Has anybody watched the movie The Perfect Storm? The Perfect Storm. What were they saying, perfect storm? That don't seem like it'd be a... You know what happened to those 6 or 7 men on that boat? They drowned. Why would they call it a perfect storm? Well, what I could find out was that there's some things that has to come together to make it perfect. There has to be the right amount of wind. There has to be a right amount of moisture. There has to be a right amount of humidity. And there has to be the right amount of water. Well, what happened that night? Everything came together perfectly. And there was a big storm. So much can go so wrong in a short period of time. We shake our heads. And when it rains, it what? It seems like it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Most of us have been there. Probably all of us have been there. This is what we call, now that's something we call reasonable fear too. Okay, any coal miners in here? Reasonable fear, Tim. When you went under that ground, each day or night or morning, there was an amount of fear you know that top, it could come down. That's why you kept your eye up there. You sort of pecked it every once in a while. Or that boom of that miner could swing around and catch you in a rib, crush you, couldn't it, Tom? Or that shuttle car come through that curtain, you're not realizing it, you done run over top of you. Or you reach down and pick up a cable. And it blows up in your hand. Blows up. Maybe kills you. See, that's reasonable fear. That's part of the job. How about driving from Norton to Big Stone or from Big Stone to Norton, huh? You look at that guy in front of you, that woman in front of you. She's weaving back and forth. That woman? Now you're afraid to go around him, huh? See what I'm saying? There's some reasonable fear. That's just part of living. We know that, huh? It's part of it. But there's another kind of fear that can really just stop you in your tracks, immobilize you completely. The fear of fear itself. Fear in a storm. You're out on the big football field. You look back and you see black clouds. You see that white lightning begin to strike and come down. What do you know? Fear of that storm's coming, right? Fear of a storm that could happen. But there's things in life worth fearing. We can't put away all fear. But we don't need to live in fear. Fear is simply a fact that we must deal with. Why? Why do we have to deal with fear? I mean, why is fear out there? When Adam and Eve sinned, everything just went haywire. And we live in a fallen universe. There's going to be storms. From in the sky, in your life, in my life. Things are going to come against us. But we know we can manage them. Mark 4:35 through 37. You remember this when I start reading it. When evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now when they had left the multitude, they took Jesus along in the boat as he was. And other little boats were also with them. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. Have we heard that before? Have you read that before? It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. A perfect storm came upon the disciples and Jesus. Terrifying wind. Close to death they were. The gospel records that Jesus was exhausted. He'd been teaching. He'd been healing people. He'd been walking from town to town, street to street. He's exhausted. The disciples with him walked with him. They watched him. They were exhausted. The crowd was overwhelming. Everyone want Jesus to touch them, to bring healing to them. And the disciples stood back and is in awe if Jesus would touch and heal people. Had to be something beautiful. And they also realized that Jesus expected them to lay hands on people and see people healed. Now, Jesus is speaking near the Sea of Galilee, real close to the sea. And the people began to press up. You know how people want to get to the front, you're in a crowd, everybody wants to get up front more and more. Well, as the crowd began to press up, Jesus was having to back up. And he gets right near the sea. And there is a boat there. Him and the disciples get in that boat. He teaches from the boat. He's wore plumb out. He finally quits and goes into the boat and just goes to sleep. He's done told the disciples, "Let's go, boys." They start out. It's evening, getting late. Getting dark. Some things is going to happen here. A great windstorm comes up. But we've got to think about something. A perfect storm. Jesus is exhausted. The disciples are exhausted. It's getting dark. Now these disciples were fishermen. They know that sea can be good and calm, or it could be turbulent. And they know also that it's not a good thing to be on that sea at nighttime. The Sea of Galilee is like a bowl. It sits down in between the mountains surrounding. It's 700 feet below sea level. And when that wind off that mountain begins to swoop down in those valleys and those crevices, swooping down the cool air and hits the warm, moist air of the sea, and the humidity is just right, a sudden storm just flares up. Now, there was translated a windstorm, I believe, in the Bible. But if we were translating it today, we would translate it a hurricane. Hurricane force winds on that boat. That boat is being filled up with water. And here the disciples are. Now think about it, people. This is the early part of Jesus' ministry. The disciples haven't been with Jesus long at all. They've seen him heal. They knew he could heal. They respected him for that. But here they are in a storm and their lives is at stake. Can that man save my life now? Can that man get me out of this storm? I respect him, but look where he is. He's in there asleep in the boat. He don't care for us. You ever feel like that? You feel like Jesus is 1,000 miles away and he doesn't care? I'll think about those disciples. They left everything to follow him. What have we left to follow Jesus? Here he is dozed off. Can I really believe that Jesus is going to get me out of my trouble? Can I really believe that? I've seen some healings. Well, think about it. We're humans. My mind says, yes, Jesus can do anything. But sometimes when my life is at stake, or my troubles is so strong on me, I don't think I'm going to make it. Where's Jesus? Where is Jesus? You follow me? Could he deliver them from this disaster? A sudden storm comes upon the Sea of Galilee, real sudden. Can storms descend upon us real sudden like? How many's had a catastrophe in a matter of minutes happen to them? Yeah, you see what I'm saying? In a matter of minutes, a storm can hit us so hard, it's life-threatening. When we're in that predicament, we're the same predicament that those disciples were in. Jesus, can you really help me? Jesus, can you really do it? The disciples were followers of Jesus. Are you a follower of Jesus? Wherever Jesus went, that's where the disciples were. Listening to his word. Helping him preach the gospel. Are we not helping him preach the gospel? But they were in real danger of drowning. Don't raise your hand. How many in here today is in real danger? Sometimes we feel like we're drowning. But those disciples were learning something. Mark gives over 30 passages to this story. It's got to be important, very important for him to give 30 verses on this story. The disciples were learning a difficult lesson. We must learn this lesson. We can find ourselves in the middle of the darkest storm in our life. When we think the bottom is filled out of everything, we can be there. Do we hear people say, trust God, you don't have any worries? But the great paradox of Christianity is that trusting God don't keep the storms away, does it? In fact, sometimes it pushes us right into the deep and scary waters. Now think about those disciples. They're fighting for their life. They ain't thinking about spiritual things at that time because they're trying to keep their life alive. Fear gripped them. They were scared. But they're learning a priceless lesson. People, there is security. There is security in the heart of God's will. What is God's will? This is God's will. You let this word speak to you. It'll tell you God's will. Fear not, for I'm with you. They learn a priceless lesson. Storms are not punishment for lack of obedience. Sometimes storms can be the result of obedience. I'm closing here. Why were they in a storm? Because they had jumped in the boat with Jesus. You see what I'm saying? Let's go, boys. And immediately they jumped in the storm with Jesus. If we follow Jesus, we're going to wind up in a storm one of these days with him. And when we're in that storm, we're going to learn that storm may be overwhelming, but it's the safest place to be with Jesus.